The mansion stood like a fortress on the edge of the city, its towering gates and polished walls reflecting the wealth of its owner. Inside, the billionaire paced the grand hallway, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. His two young daughters, aged 8 and 10, sat quietly on the staircase, their eyes wide with curiosity. They had been through so much since their mother's passing, and their father's overprotectiveness had only grown stronger. The doorbell rang, echoing through the empty halls. The billionaire straightened his tie and opened the door. Standing there was a woman in her late 30s, dressed in simple clothes, her hair tied back in a neat bun. She carried a small suitcase and wore a calm, almost serene expression. "You must be the nanny," the billionaire said, his voice tinged with skepticism. He had interviewed dozens of candidates, but none had seemed right. This woman, however, had been highly recommended by an old friend. "Yes, sir," she replied softly, her voice steady. "I'm here to take care of your daughters." The billionaire stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The girls watched from the staircase, their eyes following her every move. There was something about her, something different. She didn't seem nervous or intimidated by the grandeur of the mansion. Instead, she walked in as if she belonged there. "This is Emily and Lily," the billionaire said, gesturing toward his daughters. "They're my world. I expect you to take good care of them." The nanny nodded, her eyes softening as she looked at the girls. "I will," she said simply. The first day passed uneventfully. The nanny settled into her room, unpacked her few belongings, and began her duties. She cooked meals, helped the girls with their homework, and even played with them in the garden. The billionaire watched from a distance, still unsure about her. She seemed too perfect, too calm. That night, as the house grew quiet, the billionaire sat in his study, sipping a glass of whiskey. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He decided to check on the girls before heading to bed. As he approached their room, he heard soft whispers. Peeking through the slightly open door, he saw the nanny sitting on the edge of Lily's bed, her hand gently stroking the girl's hair. "Remember," the nanny whispered, "no matter what happens, you're stronger than you think. And you're never alone." Lily nodded sleepily, her eyes closing. The billionaire frowned. It was a strange thing to say to a child. He was about to step in when the nanny suddenly turned her head, her eyes meeting his through the crack in the door. For a moment, he froze. Her gaze was piercing, as if she could see right through him. Then she smiled softly and stood up, walking toward the door. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked, her voice calm. The billionaire cleared his throat, feeling oddly exposed. "Yes, I just wanted to check on the girls." "They're fine," she said. "They're strong, just like their father." The words lingered in the air as she walked past him, her footsteps silent on the carpeted floor. The billionaire stood there, staring after her, a strange feeling settling in his chest. The next morning, the girls were up early, chattering excitedly about the nanny. She had promised to teach them how to bake cookies, and they couldn't wait. The billionaire watched from the kitchen doorway as the nanny kneaded dough, her hands moving with practiced ease. "Do you have children of your own?" he asked, trying to make conversation. The nanny paused, her expression unreadable. "In a way," she said finally. "But my duty is here now." Before he could ask what she meant, the doorbell rang again. The billionaire frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door to find a deliveryman holding a small package. "For the nanny," the man said, handing it over. The billionaire took the package, his curiosity piqued. It was addressed to her, but there was no return address. He carried it to the kitchen, where the nanny was now helping the girls shape the dough into cookies. "This is for you," he said, handing her the package. She took it, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said quietly. The billionaire watched as she opened the package, revealing a small, intricately carved box. Inside was a strange, glowing crystal. The girls gasped, their eyes wide with wonder. "What is that?" Emily asked, reaching out to touch it. The nanny gently moved the crystal out of reach. "It's something very special," she said. "But it's not for little hands." The billionaire's unease grew. "Where did it come from?" he asked. The nanny looked at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. "It's a reminder," she said. "That not everything is as it seems." Before he could press further, the oven timer dinged, and the girls squealed with excitement. The nanny turned her attention back to them, but the billionaire couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary, and perhaps dangerous, was unfolding in his home. As the day went on, strange things began to happen. The lights flickered, the temperature in the house dropped suddenly, and the girls claimed to see shadows moving in the corners of their eyes. The billionaire dismissed it as his imagination, but deep down, he knew something was wrong. That night, as he lay in bed, he heard a soft knock on his door. He opened it to find the nanny standing there, her expression serious. "We need to talk," she said. The billionaire's heart raced. "What's going on?" The nanny hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "Your family is in danger. And I'm not just here to be their nanny. I'm here to protect them." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The billionaire stared at her, his mind racing. Before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, and the lights went out. The nanny's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. "Stay here," she said. "I'll handle this." And with that, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving the billionaire standing in the doorway, his heart pounding. The mansion was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon through the windows. The billionaire stood frozen in his doorway, his mind racing. The nanny's words echoed in his ears, "Your family is in danger. I'm here to protect them." He wanted to follow her, to demand answers, but something held him back. The sound of footsteps echoed from downstairs, followed by a low, guttural growl that sent a chill down his spine. His instincts screamed at him to stay put, but the thought of his daughters alone in their rooms pushed him into action. He grabbed a flashlight from his bedside table and hurried down the hallway, his heart pounding. The girls' room was just a few doors away, but it felt like miles. As he reached their door, he heard a soft whimper from inside. "Emily?" "Lily?" he whispered, pushing the door open. The girls were huddled together on Emily's bed, their faces pale with fear. "Daddy, what's happening?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed and pulling them close. "But I'm here. You're safe." The sound of glass shattering downstairs made them all jump. The billionaire tightened his grip on the flashlight, his mind racing. He needed to protect his daughters, but he had no idea what they were up against. Just then, the nanny appeared in the doorway, her silhouette outlined by the faint glow of the crystal she held in her hand. "Stay with them," she said to the billionaire, her voice calm but firm. "I'll handle this." Before he could respond, she turned and disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps silent. The billionaire hesitated, torn between staying with his daughters and finding out what was going on. "Who is she, Daddy?" Emily asked, her eyes wide. "I don't know," he admitted. "But she's here to help us." As the minutes dragged on, the sounds from downstairs grew louder, thuds, crashes, and the occasional inhuman growl. The billionaire held his daughters close, his mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? What was she protecting them from? And why had she chosen his family? Finally, the house fell silent. The billionaire waited, his heart pounding, until the nanny reappeared in the doorway. She looked unharmed, but her expression was grim. "It's safe now," she said. "But we need to talk." The billionaire nodded, his mind still reeling. He tucked the girls back into bed, promising to explain everything in the morning, and followed the nanny to the study. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of the crystal, which she placed on the desk. The billionaire sat across from her, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The nanny hesitated, her eyes searching his. "My name doesn't matter," she said finally. "What matters is why I'm here. Your family is in danger, and I've been sent to protect you." "From what?" the billionaire demanded. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "From something you wouldn't believe if I told you." The billionaire frowned. "Try me." The nanny sighed, as if weighing her words carefully. "I'm not from this world," she said finally. "I come from a distant planet, one that has been at war for centuries. The enemy I've been fighting has followed me here, and they see your family as a way to get to me." The billionaire stared at her, his mind struggling to process her words. "You're saying you're an alien?" She nodded. "In your terms, yes. But I'm not here to harm you. I'm here to protect you." The billionaire leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. It sounded impossible, insane even, but the events of the night were hard to dismiss. "Why us?" he asked. "Why my family?" The nanny's expression softened. "Because of who you are," she said. "You've built an empire, but you've also suffered great loss. Your daughters are special, and the enemy knows that. They want to use them to get to me." The billionaire's chest tightened at the mention of his daughters. "What do they want with them?" "They want to break me," the nanny said simply. "And they'll do whatever it takes to achieve that." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The billionaire's mind raced, torn between disbelief and the need to protect his family. "What do we do?" he asked finally. The nanny leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. "We fight," she said. "Together." The billionaire sat in silence, the nanny's words echoing in his mind. "We fight. Together." It sounded like something out of a movie, not his life. But the strange events of the night, the growls, the crashes, the glowing crystal, were impossible to ignore. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady. "What do we do next?" The nanny nodded, her expression serious. "First, we need to make sure your daughters are safe. The enemy will try to use them against us, so we can't let them out of our sight." The billionaire's chest tightened at the thought of his girls being in danger. "What about you? If they're after you, shouldn't you leave? Take the fight somewhere else?" The nanny shook her head. "It's too late for that. They've already found me here. If I leave now, they'll come after your family anyway. My only option is to stay and protect you." The billionaire frowned, his mind racing. How do we even fight something we can't see? Something we don't understand? The nanny reached for the glowing crystal on the desk, holding it up so its light filled the room. "This is a fragment of my world's energy," she explained. "It's what gives me my abilities. But it's also what the enemy wants. If they get their hands on it, they'll become unstoppable." The billionaire stared at the crystal, its light pulsing faintly. "And you've brought it here?" "I had no choice," she said. "It's the only way to keep it safe, for now." Before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of breaking glass. The billionaire jumped to his feet, his heart pounding. "The girls," he shouted, rushing toward the door. The nanny was right behind him, her movements swift and silent. They raced up the staircase, the flashlight in the billionaire's hand shaking as he ran. When they reached the girl's room, the door was wide open. The billionaire's heart sank as he saw the shattered window, the curtains fluttering in the cold night air. "Emily! Lily!" He called, his voice desperate. There was no answer. The nanny stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the shadows. "They're not here," she said, her voice calm but urgent. The billionaire's chest tightened with panic. Where are they? What happened? The nanny knelt by the broken glass, her fingers brushing against something on the floor. She held it up, a small, metallic object that glinted in the flashlight's beam. This is a tracking device, she said. The enemy has taken them. The billionaire's knees nearly gave out. No, he whispered. No, this can't be happening. The nanny stood, her expression resolute. We'll get them back, she said. But we need to move quickly. The billionaire nodded, forcing himself to focus. What do we do? The nanny handed him the tracking device. This will lead us to them. But we need to be prepared. The enemy is dangerous, and they won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way. The billionaire clenched his fists, his fear giving way to determination. I don't care how dangerous they are. I'm getting my daughters back. The nanny nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. Then let's go. They hurried downstairs, the nanny grabbing the glowing crystal and tucking it into a small pouch at her side. The billionaire followed her to the garage, where his sleek black car sat waiting. We'll take this, he said, grabbing the keys. The nanny shook her head. No. They'll be expecting that. We need to move quietly. She led him to the edge of the property, where a dense forest stretched into the darkness. The billionaire hesitated, his heart racing. Where are we going? He asked. The nanny held up the tracking device, its faint glow illuminating the path ahead. They're close, she said. But we need to be careful. The enemy will be watching. The billionaire nodded, his mind racing with fear and determination. He followed the nanny into the forest, the sounds of the night closing in around them. As they moved deeper into the woods, the billionaire couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made his heart jump. But the nanny moved with confidence, her steps silent and sure. Finally, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a small, dilapidated cabin, its windows dark and its door slightly ajar. The tracking device in the nanny's hand glowed brighter as they approached. They're in there, she whispered. The billionaire's chest tightened. What's the plan? The nanny handed him a small, glowing orb. This will create a distraction. When I give the signal, you run in and get your daughters. I'll handle the enemy. The billionaire nodded, his grip tightening on the orb. Be careful. The nanny gave him a small smile. You too. She moved toward the cabin, her movements swift and silent. The billionaire watched as she disappeared into the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. A moment later, a loud crash echoed from inside the cabin, followed by a blinding flash of light. The billionaire didn't hesitate. He ran toward the door, his flashlight in one hand and the glowing orb in the other. Inside, the cabin was in chaos. The nanny was locked in a fierce battle with a shadowy figure, their movements too fast to follow. The billionaire's eyes scanned the room, and his heart leaped when he saw Emily and Lily huddled in a corner, their faces pale with fear. Girls, he shouted, rushing toward them. Daddy, they cried, their voices filled with relief. He grabbed them, pulling them close. We need to go. Now. But as they turned toward the door, the shadowy figure broke free from the nanny's grasp, its glowing eyes locking onto the billionaire. You're not going anywhere, it hissed, its voice cold and inhuman. The billionaire froze, his heart pounding. But before the figure could move, the nanny stepped between them, her eyes blazing with determination. Run, she shouted. The billionaire didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his daughters and bolted for the door, the sounds of battle echoing behind him. As they reached the edge of the clearing, he glanced back, his heart in his throat. The nanny was still fighting, her movements swift and powerful. But the enemy was strong, and he could see her struggling to hold it back. We have to help her, Emily said, her voice trembling. The billionaire hesitated, torn between protecting his daughters and going back for the nanny. But before he could decide, a loud explosion rocked the clearing, sending a shockwave through the air. When the dust settled, the cabin was gone, and the nanny stood alone in the clearing, her chest heaving and her clothes torn. The billionaire stared at her, his mind reeling. What happened? The nanny turned to him, her expression grim. It's not over, she said. This was just the beginning. The forest was eerily silent after the explosion, the air thick with the scent of smoke and burnt wood. The billionaire stood frozen, his daughters clinging to him, their small bodies trembling with fear. The nanny approached them, her steps slow and deliberate, her face etched with exhaustion. Are you hurt? She asked, her voice soft but urgent. The billionaire shook his head, still trying to process what had just happened. No, we're fine. But, what was that? What just happened? The nanny glanced back at the smoldering remains of the cabin, her expression unreadable. That was a warning, she said. The enemy is stronger than I anticipated. They're not going to stop until they get what they want. The billionaire's chest tightened. And what do they want? The nanny hesitated, her eyes flickering to the glowing crystal still tucked in her pouch. They want this, she said, pulling it out and holding it up. And they want me. The billionaire stared at the crystal, its light pulsing faintly in the darkness. What is it? The nanny took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to say. This crystal is a fragment of my world's energy, she explained. It's what gives me my abilities, my strength, my speed, my power. But it's also what the enemy wants. If they get their hands on it, they'll use it to destroy not just me, but everything in their path. The billionaire's mind raced, struggling to keep up. So you're saying this thing is like a weapon? In the wrong hands, yes, the nanny said. But in the right hands, it's a tool for protection. That's why I was sent here, to keep it safe. The billionaire frowned, his confusion growing. But why here? Why my family? The nanny's expression softened, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. Because of you, she said. Your family is special. Your daughters, they have a connection to this energy, even if they don't realize it yet. The enemy senses that, and they want to exploit it. The billionaire's heart sank. What does that mean for them? Are they in danger? The nanny nodded. As long as the enemy is out there, they'll be a target. But I won't let anything happen to them. I promise. The billionaire stared at her, his mind reeling. He wanted to believe her, to trust that she could protect his family, but the events of the night had shaken him to his core. Who are you? He asked finally. Really? The nanny hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. My name is irrelevant, she said. What matters is why I'm here. I was sent to protect your family, and that's what I intend to do. The billionaire shook his head, frustration bubbling to the surface. That's not good enough. I need to know who you are, where you come from, and why you're really here. My daughters' lives are at stake, and I can't just blindly trust someone I don't even know. The nanny met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. You're right, she said. You deserve to know the truth. She took a deep breath, as if preparing herself. I come from a distant planet, one that has been at war for centuries. My people are guardians, tasked with protecting the energy that sustains our world. But the enemy, the ones who attacked us tonight, they want to take that energy for themselves. They've already destroyed much of my world, and now they're coming for yours. The billionaire stared at her, his mind struggling to process her words. So you're saying you're an alien? The nanny nodded. In your terms, yes. But I'm not here to harm you. I'm here to protect you. The billionaire ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts spinning. It sounded impossible, insane even, but the events of the night were hard to dismiss. "And my daughters?" he asked. "Why are they connected to this energy?" The nanny's expression softened. "Because they're special," she said. "They have a pure, untapped connection to the energy, one that the enemy wants to exploit. But with the right guidance, they could also learn to harness it for good." The billionaire's chest tightened at the thought of his daughters being caught up in something so dangerous. "I don't want them involved in this," he said firmly. "They're just kids." The nanny nodded. "I understand. But the enemy won't see it that way. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want." The billionaire clenched his fists, his fear giving way to determination. "Then we'll stop them," he said. "Together." The nanny gave him a small smile, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Together," she agreed. The forest was still, the only sound the faint rustling of leaves in the night breeze. The billionaire stood with the nanny, his daughters clutching his hands tightly. The weight of her revelation hung heavy in the air, but there was no time to dwell on it. The enemy was out there, and they were coming. "What's the plan?" the billionaire asked, his voice low but steady. The nanny glanced around, her eyes scanning the shadows. "We need to get your daughters to safety first," she said. "Then we can figure out how to stop the enemy." The billionaire nodded, his grip tightening on his daughter's hands. "Where can we go?" "They've already found us here." The nanny hesitated, then reached into her pouch and pulled out the glowing crystal. "This can create a temporary shield," she explained. "It will hide us from the enemy, but it won't last long. We need to move quickly." She held the crystal aloft, its light intensifying as she whispered something in a language the billionaire couldn't understand. A shimmering barrier formed around them, faint but visible in the moonlight. "Stay close," the nanny said, her voice urgent. "And whatever you do, don't leave the barrier." They moved through the forest, the barrier flickering faintly as they went. The billionaire kept his daughters close, his heart pounding with every step. He could feel the tension in the air, the sense that they were being watched. As they reached the edge of the forest, the nanny suddenly stopped, her body tensing. "Get down," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The billionaire didn't hesitate. He pulled his daughters to the ground, shielding them with his body. The nanny crouched beside them, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. The billionaire followed her gaze, his breath catching in his throat. Emerging from the shadows was a figure, tall, dark, and radiating an aura of menace. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its movements were unnervingly smooth, almost mechanical. "That's one of them," the nanny whispered. "A scout. If it finds us, it will call for reinforcements." The billionaire's heart raced. "What do we do?" The nanny's eyes narrowed, her expression determined. "We take it out before it can alert the others." Before he could respond, she was gone, moving silently through the trees. The billionaire watched, his chest tight with fear, as she approached the figure from behind. The scout turned suddenly, as if sensing her presence, but it was too late. The nanny struck with lightning speed, her movements a blur. The scout let out a guttural roar, its glowing eyes flashing with anger, but the nanny was relentless. The billionaire watched in awe as she fought, her strength and agility far beyond anything he had ever seen. It was like watching a predator take down its prey, efficient, precise, and deadly. Finally, the scout collapsed, its body dissolving into a cloud of dark smoke. The nanny stood over it, her chest heaving, her expression grim. "It's done," she said, returning to the group. "But we need to move. More will come." The billionaire nodded, helping his daughters to their feet. "Where to?" The nanny glanced around, her eyes scanning the horizon. "There's a safe house nearby," she said. "It's hidden, protected by the same energy as this crystal. We'll be safe there, for a while. They moved quickly, the nanny leading the way. The billionaire kept his daughters close, his mind racing with questions. Who were these enemies? What did they want? And how could they possibly stop them? As they walked, the nanny glanced back at him, her expression softening. I know this is a lot to take in, she said. But you're handling it better than most. The billionaire gave her a wry smile. I don't have much of a choice, do I? The nanny shook her head. No. But you're stronger than you think. And your daughters, they're stronger than you know. The billionaire glanced down at Emily and Lily, their small hands clutching his. They looked up at him with wide eyes, their faces pale but determined. We're going to be okay, right, Daddy? Lily asked, her voice trembling. The billionaire forced a smile, his heart aching at the fear in her voice. Yes, sweetheart, he said. We're going to be okay. They reached the safe house just as the first rays of dawn began to lighten the sky. It was a small, unassuming cabin, hidden deep in the woods. The nanny led them inside, the door closing behind them with a soft click. The interior was sparse but comfortable, with a small kitchen, a sitting area, and 2 bedrooms. The nanny gestured toward the larger of the 2. You and your daughters can rest here, she said. I'll keep watch. The billionaire nodded, his exhaustion catching up to him. He led the girls to the bedroom, tucking them into the bed and sitting beside them until they fell asleep. When he returned to the sitting area, the nanny was standing by the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon. What happens now? He asked, his voice low. The nanny turned to him, her expression serious. Now, we prepare, she said. The enemy will come for us, and when they do, we need to be ready. The billionaire nodded, his resolve hardening. Then tell me what I need to do. The nanny gave him a small smile, a flicker of respect in her eyes. First, we need to talk about your daughters, she said. Because they may be the key to stopping this war. The safe house was quiet, the only sound the soft breathing of the billionaire's daughters as they slept in the next room. He sat across from the nanny, his mind racing with questions. Her last words had left him uneasy. What do you mean, my daughters are the key to stopping this war? He asked, his voice low but urgent. The nanny leaned forward, her expression serious. Your daughters have a unique connection to the energy of my world, she explained. It's rare, even among my people. If we can help them harness that energy, they could become powerful allies in this fight. The billionaire shook his head, his chest tightening. No. They're just kids. I won't let them get involved in this. The nanny's gaze softened. I understand your fear. But the enemy already sees them as a threat. They won't stop until they've captured them, or worse. The only way to protect them is to teach them how to protect themselves. The billionaire clenched his fists, his mind torn. He wanted to keep his daughters safe, to shield them from the danger that surrounded them. But the nanny's words made sense. If the enemy was coming for them, they needed to be prepared. What would that even look like? He asked finally. The nanny reached into her pouch and pulled out the glowing crystal. This crystal can help them tap into their connection, she said. But it will take time and training. And it won't be easy. The billionaire stared at the crystal, its light pulsing faintly. And if we don't do this? If we just run? The nanny shook her head. The enemy will find you. They always do. Running will only delay the inevitable. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The billionaire glanced toward the bedroom, where his daughters slept peacefully, unaware of the danger they were in. All right, he said finally. We'll do it. But on one condition. The nanny raised an eyebrow. What's that? You teach me too, he said. I won't stand by and watch my daughters fight alone. If they're in this, so am I. The nanny studied him for a moment, then nodded. Agreed. Before they could say more, a loud crash echoed from outside, shaking the walls of the cabin. The billionaire jumped to his feet, his heart pounding. What was that? He asked, his voice tense. The nanny was already moving, her eyes scanning the window. The enemy, she said. They've found us. The billionaire's chest tightened. What do we do? The nanny turned to him, her expression grim. We fight, she said. But first, we need to get your daughters to safety. She handed him the glowing crystal. Take this. It will protect you. I'll hold them off as long as I can. The billionaire hesitated, his mind racing. I'm not leaving you here alone. The nanny gave him a small smile. You don't have a choice. Your daughters need you. Go. Before he could argue, another crash shook the cabin, this time closer. The nanny pushed him toward the bedroom, her voice urgent. Go. The billionaire didn't hesitate. He ran to the bedroom, shaking his daughters awake. Girls, we need to go. Now. Emily and Lily blinked up at him, their faces pale with fear. What's happening, Daddy? Emily asked. No time to explain, he said, helping them out of bed. Just stay close to me. He led them to the back door, the glowing crystal clutched tightly in his hand. As they stepped outside, the sounds of battle erupted behind them, the nanny's voice, sharp and commanding, mingling with the guttural growls of the enemy. The billionaire forced himself to focus, leading his daughters through the dense forest. The crystal's light guided their path, its glow intensifying as they moved. Daddy, where are we going? Lily asked, her voice trembling. Somewhere safe, he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. As they ran, the forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. The billionaire's heart raced, his grip tightening on the crystal. Suddenly, a figure stepped into their path, its glowing eyes locking onto them. The billionaire froze, his breath catching in his throat. Well, the figure said, its voice cold and mocking. Look what we have here. The billionaire stepped in front of his daughters, shielding them with his body. Stay back, he warned, holding up the crystal. The figure laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Do you really think that little trinket can stop me? Before the billionaire could respond, the figure lunged, its movements unnervingly fast. The billionaire braced himself, but the attack never came. Instead, the nanny appeared, her body slamming into the figure with enough force to send it flying. She landed in a crouch, her eyes blazing with determination. Go, she shouted. I'll handle this. The billionaire didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his daughters and ran, the sounds of battle fading behind them. As they reached the edge of the forest, the billionaire glanced back, his heart in his throat. The nanny was still fighting, her movements swift and powerful. But the enemy was strong, and he could see her struggling to hold them off. We have to help her, Emily said, her voice trembling. The billionaire hesitated, torn between protecting his daughters and going back for the nanny. But before he could decide, a loud explosion rocked the forest, sending a shockwave through the air. When the dust settled, the nanny stood alone, her chest heaving and her clothes torn. The billionaire stared at her, his mind reeling. What happened? The nanny turned to him, her expression grim. It's not over, she said. This was just the beginning. The forest was eerily silent after the explosion, the air thick with tension. The nanny stood amidst the wreckage, her chest heaving and her clothes torn. The billionaire and his daughters stared at her, their faces pale with shock. What do you mean, it's not over? The billionaire asked, his voice trembling. The nanny turned to him, her expression grim. The enemy won't stop until they get what they want, she said. And they're willing to destroy everything in their path to do it. The billionaire's chest tightened. What do we do? The nanny hesitated, her eyes scanning the horizon. We need to end this, she said finally. Once and for all. She reached into her pouch and pulled out the glowing crystal, its light pulsing faintly. This is the key, she said. If we can use it to amplify your daughter's connection to the energy, we might be able to stop the enemy for good. The billionaire frowned. But you said it would take time to train them. We don't have time. The nanny nodded. I know. But we don't have a choice. It's the only way. The billionaire glanced at his daughters, their wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. He knelt down, taking their hands in his. Girls, he said, his voice soft but steady. I need you to be brave. Can you do that? Emily and Lily nodded, their small hands trembling in his. We'll try, Daddy, Emily said. The billionaire forced a smile, his heart aching at the fear in their voices. That's all I ask. He stood, turning back to the nanny. What do we need to do? The nanny held out the crystal, its light intensifying as she spoke. We need to create a barrier, she said. A shield strong enough to hold off the enemy while we prepare. But it will take all of us working together. The billionaire nodded, his resolve hardening. Tell us what to do. The nanny handed the crystal to Emily, her expression serious. Hold this, she said. And focus on its light. Imagine it growing bigger, stronger, until it surrounds us. Emily took the crystal, her small hands trembling. She closed her eyes, her brow furrowing in concentration. The crystal's light began to pulse, growing brighter with each passing second. The nanny turned to Lily. You too, she said. Focus on your sister. Help her make the light stronger. Lily nodded, closing her eyes and clutching Emily's hand. The crystal's light intensified, its glow spreading outward until it formed a shimmering barrier around them. The billionaire watched in awe, his heart swelling with pride. His daughters were stronger than he had ever realized. The nanny turned to him, her expression serious. Now it's your turn, she said. You need to protect them. No matter what happens, don't let the barrier break. The billionaire nodded, his grip tightening on the flashlight he still held. I won't. The nanny gave him a small smile, a flicker of respect in her eyes. I know you won't. She turned, her gaze fixed on the horizon. They're coming, she said. The billionaire followed her gaze, his heart sinking as he saw the shadows moving in the distance. The enemy was approaching, their glowing eyes piercing the darkness. The nanny stepped forward, her body tense with anticipation. Stay behind me, she said. And whatever you do, don't let the barrier break. The billionaire nodded, his chest tight with fear. He stood in front of his daughters, shielding them with his body. The crystal's light pulsed around them, its glow growing brighter as the enemy drew closer. The first wave of attackers hit the barrier with a deafening crash, their bodies slamming against the shimmering light. The barrier held, but the force of the impact sent a shockwave through the air. The nanny struck back, her movements swift and powerful. She fought with a ferocity that left the billionaire in awe, her body a blur of motion as she took down one enemy after another. But the attackers kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. The barrier began to flicker, its light dimming under the relentless assault. Daddy, we can't hold it much longer. Emily cried, her voice trembling. The billionaire's heart raced, his mind racing for a solution. He glanced at the nanny, her body battered but still fighting. We need to do something, he shouted. The nanny turned to him, her eyes blazing with determination. We need to end this now, she said. But it will take everything we have. The billionaire nodded, his resolve hardening. Tell us what to do. The nanny stepped back, her body glowing faintly as she channeled the crystal's energy. We need to combine our strength, she said. All of us. Together. The billionaire hesitated, then reached out, taking his daughter's hands in his. The nanny placed her hand on top of theirs, her touch warm and reassuring. Focus on the light, she said. And imagine it growing stronger. Stronger than anything the enemy can throw at us. The billionaire closed his eyes, his mind filled with images of his daughters, their laughter, their smiles. He thought of the life they had built together, the love that bound them. The crystal's light exploded outward, its glow blinding. The barrier surged, its power overwhelming the enemy. The attackers were thrown back, their bodies dissolving into smoke as the light consumed them. When the light faded, the forest was silent. The enemy was gone, their presence erased as if they had never existed. The billionaire opened his eyes, his chest heaving with exhaustion. His daughters clung to him, their faces pale but unharmed. The nanny stood before them, her body glowing faintly. She smiled, her expression filled with pride. "You did it," she said. The billionaire shook his head. "We did it," he said. "Together." The nanny nodded, her gaze softening. "Yes. Together." The forest was quiet now, the air still and calm after the chaos of the battle. The billionaire stood with his daughters, their small hands clutching his as they stared at the nanny. Her body glowed faintly, the light from the crystals still pulsing around her. "Is it over?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. The nanny nodded, her expression softening. "Yes," she said. "The enemy is gone. You're safe now." The billionaire let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, his chest tight with relief. But as he looked at the nanny, he noticed something was off. Her glow was fading, her movements slower, more deliberate. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. The nanny gave him a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she said. "But I can't stay much longer." The billionaire frowned. "What do you mean?" The nanny hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. "The energy I used to fight the enemy, it's tied to the crystal. And to me. I've expended too much of it. I need to return to my world to recover." The billionaire's heart sank. "But, what about us? What about the girls?" The nanny's expression softened, and she knelt down to face Emily and Lily. "You two were incredibly brave," she said, her voice gentle. "You saved not just yourselves, but everyone around you. Never forget how strong you are." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "But we don't want you to go," she said. Lily nodded, her lower lip trembling. "Please stay." The nanny reached out, brushing a tear from Emily's cheek. "I wish I could," she said. "But my world needs me too. And you don't need me anymore. You have everything you need right here." She stood, turning to the billionaire. "Take care of them," she said. "They're stronger than you know." The billionaire nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I will," he said. "But, thank you. For everything." The nanny gave him a small smile, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. "You're welcome." She stepped back, her body beginning to fade as the crystal's light intensified. "Remember," she said, her voice echoing softly. "You're never alone." And with that, she was gone, her form dissolving into a shower of light that drifted upward, disappearing into the sky. The billionaire stood there, his daughters clinging to him, as the forest fell silent once more. The crystal lay on the ground where the nanny had stood, its light now dim but steady. Emily picked it up, her small hands cradling it gently. "What do we do with this?" she asked. The billionaire hesitated, then took the crystal from her, holding it up to the light. "We keep it safe," he said. "As a reminder of her. And of everything we've been through." Lily nodded, her eyes still filled with tears. "Do you think she'll come back?" The billionaire knelt down, pulling his daughters into a tight hug. "I don't know," he said. "But I do know that she'll always be with us. In here." He tapped his chest, over his heart, and the girls nodded. He tapped his chest, over his heart, and the girls nodded, their tears slowly drying. As they made their way back to the safe house, the billionaire couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The danger was over, and his family was safe. But more than that, he felt a newfound strength, a belief that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they could face them together. The safe house felt different now, quieter, calmer, as if the storm had finally passed. The billionaire sat with his daughters at the small kitchen table, the glowing crystal resting in the center. Its light was soft now, a gentle reminder of everything they had been through. Emily reached out, her small fingers brushing against the crystal. "Do you think she's okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The billionaire hesitated, then nodded. "I think so," he said. "She's strong. And she's where she needs to be." Lily tilted her head, her brow furrowed. "But why did she have to leave? We could have helped her." The billionaire smiled, his heart swelling with pride at his daughter's resilience. "Sometimes, people have to do things that are hard," he said. "Even if it means leaving the ones they care about. But that doesn't mean they're gone forever." Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Do you think we'll see her again?" The billionaire thought for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe," he said. "But even if we don't, she'll always be a part of us. She taught us how to be brave, how to stand up for what's right. And that's something we'll carry with us forever." The girls nodded, their expressions thoughtful. The billionaire reached out, taking their hands in his. "You know," he said, "this whole experience taught me something too." "What?" Lily asked, her eyes wide. "It taught me that no matter how scary things get, we're stronger when we're together," he said. "And that love, real love, is the most powerful thing in the world. It's what kept us going, even when things seemed impossible." Emily smiled, her face lighting up. "Like when we made the barrier?" The billionaire nodded. "Exactly. You two were amazing. You showed me that even the smallest of us can make a big difference." The girls beamed, their earlier sadness replaced with pride. The billionaire felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at them, his heart overflowing with love. "I'm so proud of you both," he said. "And I know your mom would be too." The mention of their mother brought a moment of quiet reflection. Emily and Lily exchanged a glance, then leaned into their father, their small arms wrapping around him. "We miss her," Lily said softly. "I know," the billionaire replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I miss her too. But she's always with us, just like the nanny said. In here." He tapped his chest, and the girls nodded, their tears drying as they clung to him. As the days passed, life slowly returned to normal. The billionaire took his daughters back to their home, the mansion now feeling more like a sanctuary than a fortress. They kept the crystal on the mantel, its soft glow a constant reminder of the nanny and the lessons she had taught them. One evening, as the sun set and the crystal's light began to pulse faintly, the billionaire sat with his daughters on the porch, watching the stars come out. "Do you think she's up there?" Emily asked, pointing to the sky. The billionaire smiled, his gaze fixed on the twinkling lights above. "I like to think so," he said. "And I like to think she's watching over us, just like she promised." Lily leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I'm glad we're safe," she said. "Me too," the billionaire replied, wrapping an arm around her. "And no matter what happens, we'll always have each other." The girls nodded, their eyes closing as they drifted off to sleep. The billionaire sat there, the weight of the past few weeks finally lifting from his shoulders. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years, a quiet certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As the stars shone brightly above, the billionaire whispered a silent thank you, to the nanny, to his late wife, and to the universe for giving him the strength to protect what mattered most. And in that moment, he knew they would be okay.